Hello everyone, welcome to the lesson on the High Renaissance. The term High Renaissance refers to the time period between the late 1400s through the mid-1500s. There are a few powerful personalities such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Raphael associated with this time. But there are many, countless remarkable artists working throughout Europe during the period of the High Renaissance. Long about the year 1500, the Medici family was able to come back to Florence after being driven from power for several years by the monk Savonarola. Savonarola preached that all of the art and luxury goods were a sin, and inspired many people to destroy their artwork and their beautiful clothing, and caused a lot of political upheaval. And he was eventually imprisoned and burned as a heretic. Yet even after his death, the period of the High Renaissance continued to be one of great political and social upheaval, even as the arts and sciences flourished. Let's take a quick trip into architecture. The architecture of the Renaissance was strongly influenced by the humanist movement, which encouraged individual potential, and this gave architects the freedom to explore new ideas. The fundamental idea behind this developing style, based on the humanist belief, was a belief in a natural order, that there was indeed a perfect harmony, which could be achieved by applying these certain aesthetic principles and mathematical concepts. The drawing on the left is by the great architect Leon Alberti. And he was really a pioneer in this application of humanist principles to architecture, and his buildings are throughout Florence and Rome. You know, this architect also wrote a book called On Painting, and this book gave guidelines as to how to create a successful painting. And he had definite classes, definite orders of what was really important and what was not. According to Alberti, there are certain fundamental truths that involve beauty, God, and harmony. And the job of the artist is to embody these truths and to create works that would bring the viewer into an experience of some kind of a higher order of things. In his architecture, Alberti sought to create forms in which nothing could be added or taken away without destroying the overall statement. Alberti believed that the circle was the shape that best embodied this universal harmony. Now that's interesting because in Asian cultures there is a similar belief. The design of Santa Maria Novella, which we see here, demonstrates his belief in harmony and proportion. Alberti traveled to Rome, and he dedicated many years to studying and working to preserve the Roman ruins. To this end, he designed buildings based upon classical Roman architecture. We see this in the Church of St. Andrea in Mantua, Italy. The photo on the right shows the front of the church, and this is where Alberti uses both the columns and arches typically used by Roman and Greek builders. But in this case, they really are decoration rather than a part of the structural support, which is how they were used in Roman and Greek times. The photo on the left shows the inside of this church. And if you've studied the Roman ruins, this is really a throwback. He's really honoring the style of the Romans with this interior. Now another architect is Bramante, and his little temple, or Tempietto, above is in Rome, and it's supposedly on the spot where St. Peter was martyred. Bramante did follow the classic style, but he also added elements of rhythm and proportion. Look at the two buildings on the right. The one on the top is Via Rotunda, built by Palladio, and the one on the bottom is Monticello, built by Thomas Jefferson. So you can see that Thomas Jefferson was strongly influenced by these architects of the past. He was also inspired when he built University of Virginia to honor the Renaissance architects. Alberti, Palladio, and all of the architects of the era sought to achieve a perfect balance, proportion and harmony in the buildings that they created. You know, another great architect was a fellow named Michelangelo. So let's start our delve into his work by looking at some of his architecture. He was known to be, he was very incredibly gifted, but he was also rather temperamental, and he had a hard time getting along with people throughout his life. But look what he left behind. The left is the famous St. Peter's Church at the Vatican. It's so powerful. That is a huge church, which doesn't really show in the photograph. I was able to go inside and was really quite struck by the grandeur and beauty of this church. Michelangelo designed the dome. So on the right are some stairs that were designed by Michelangelo in the Laurentian Library. Notice how you wouldn't really see stairs from above to get the appreciation of this beautiful harmony of design, and yet that's exactly what he's done. He's made a beautiful design that, when seen from afar, has a great harmony, and also is beautiful, I'm sure, when you're walking up and down them. But really, this is what Michelangelo lived for. He was a sculptor. His David is 13.5 feet high. 13.5 feet high. Like twice as high as a person, pretty much. This is considered one of the greatest masterpieces in all of art. When we look back on Donatello's little youthful David with the pretty hat, this guy is totally different and shows the classical Greek styling also. Now, there's some funny things about the Moses here. Michelangelo's Moses. One thing to consider is that it was viewed to be seen from below. And so when, in that case, it really has a towering proportion to it. There are many of these sculptures in Florence and in Rome that were designed to be perched on a wall in a sort of an outcropping or an alcove to be seen from below. Now the horns are really what I think is interesting about Moses. See, Moses has little horns. But it's only because of bad translation, where instead of rays, it was translated as horns. And so when you see the little, they look like those little strap-on horns on Moses, just read them as rays of light, and you'll be pretty close to the artist's intention. Hey, here's another one of my favorite ones of all time. There's a lot of them. But this is the Pietà, Michelangelo's Pietà. The term Pietà simply means Mary holding the dead Christ. But this one was carved when Michelangelo was only 28 years old. Now, he used several tools to add power to this scene. One of those tools would be the size of Mary compared to the size of the Christ figure. The Christ figure would come about up to Mary's shoulder if he got up, which would be another miracle. Also, he made Mary's face very beautiful and youthful. That was kind of controversial at the time. Another thing that was controversial was, he was only 28 years old, and it was his first real commission. And when he presented it, people said, oh, there's no way that young man could have done that. They didn't believe that he did it, or they were giving him a hard time. So he sneaked into where it was at night, and he put this kind of banner, like a Miss America banner, across her chest. Actually, I think that banner was already there. But he carved his initials into it. Michelangelo. You can still see that to this day. He put his name right across the front of it. And according to the legend, he remained ashamed about that act for the rest of his life. But looking at this piece, we have a parallel reality. We have Mary holding Christ, which is a story that affects a huge part of the human population. And then we have a mother who's just lost her child. And if you look closely here, Michelangelo has had these fingers. They're touching dead flesh, disembodied flesh. It's so powerful the way that he got the details out of marble using such limited tools. So if you have to remember one piece, let it be this one. But wait, there's more when it comes to Michelangelo. What about the Sistine Chapel? Now, at the risk of sounding like a broken record tour guide telling you about how great it was. Oh my goodness, the Sistine Chapel. You can't even imagine. It's such a beautiful place. But let's talk about it in specifics, in case any of you might not know about it. So, first let's start with the basics. Michelangelo did not consider himself a painter. He was a sculptor. And so when the Pope offered him this job of painting the Sistine Chapel, he didn't really want to do it. There's all this correspondence. They had a kind of a strained relationship, and he complained a lot. But finally he did accept, and it took him over 4 years to complete it. Now, one thing to clarify, he did not lay on his back to paint. He reached over his head, and he drew some pictures of himself reaching up, and he wrote poetry about how much his shoulders hurt. But there's a myth that he laid on his back. That's just not quite how it worked. But he did it with fresco. Think about it. Painting wet plaster. And you'd only go in little sections at a time to finish this remarkable, remarkable work. So the creation of Adam is here. It's one of the most famous. But look at this image of Zacharias. The thing about the Sistine Chapel is that wherever you look, there's some beautiful scene going on. There's Adam and Eve. There's the creation of Adam right there in the middle. And far at the end is the last judgment. Now, he painted this very near the end of his life, when Michelangelo was kind of disillusioned by the corruption in the church, and he had just had that sadness that comes upon people at the end of their lives. So here we have Saint Bartholomew. This is a detail of this painting, the fresco at the end of the chapel. And this flayed skin, that's Michelangelo. So this one was much harder, and it's much, much darker. In fact, he painted figures of the church as the devil. And it was not that much loved when it was finished. But now the two together are seen as truly great masterpieces. Hey, so let's talk about some of the tools that artists use to create this great work. Chiaroscuro. Say it with me. Chiaroscuro. This means light and dark. Chiaro, light. Dark, scuro. You could think about when something is obscured. That's dark. This means contrasting light and dark for dramatic effect. If the artist emphasizes the darkest and the lightest shades, then this brings drama and emphasis to the focal point. This technique was first really developed in the Renaissance, and it remains a fundamental principle in the arts to this day. Often the darkest and the lightest value are placed right next to each other, and that helps to enhance both. And to help you remember, we have Chiaro and Scuro from the Memphis College of Arts. Another tool was something called sfumato, right here, like fumar, smoke. So sfumato means a smoke-like effect, and that's often done around the hair of a figure or in the background. These are two paintings by the great artist Leonardo da Vinci. Now, with the Mona Lisa, it's almost too famous for us to be able to see it. There are a host of myths that surround this painting. One of them is that it was cut from a larger painting. But no matter what you think of it, it's an enigmatic, mysterious portrait with lots of sfumato. And what we have here is a triangle composition, another use of the sacred geometry used by the architects, and something that Leonardo used to great effect. In addition to being a painter, he was also an engineer, and he built all sorts of things for his employers. This is an example of a catapult with all these notes for its construction. One of the things about his notes is that they were always written backwards, like you would have to hold them up to a mirror in order to read them. Really, Leonardo had such a genius mind that he had a hard time focusing and finishing things. Speaking of finishing things, we'll wrap up the first half of the slideshow and carry on with the High Renaissance in part 2. Stay tuned.